All right. So, Roland, thanks
Yes.
for coming on.
Yeah.
Faith in the struggle.
Welcome.
Been a little
Yes.
bit of struggle in your life.
Yeah. A
So,
few struggles.
yeah. So, we'll get into a little bit. So, your husband, who is ex-husband, you did
Hmm.
get a divorce, and we'll get into that. Gary, we just had his funeral
Correct.
a week ago from filming this ish, a little over a week ago.
Right.
Um, how did you feel that day? He's an ex-husband, but you still were kind of his main caregiver.
Yes.
Yeah. What was it
We
like?
weren't friends for a few years after the divorce,
Yeah.
but then he got really sick.
Yeah.
And we knew way back that he was going to develop some kind of lung problem
Mm-hmm.
because of a rare disease that he had. It was a genetic disorder, and the
Uh-huh.
doctors had said, "Oh, yeah, that's what it is, but there's no cure. So, in a couple of years, you'll be on oxygen." But it took
Mm.
like 20 years. So
Yeah.
I kept telling him, you should be grateful, and I think it's because of it was a storage disorder. So the medicines for like cholesterol and stuff helped keep it in check.
Okay.
And so he started becoming more needy. And the other things too. I mean, he didn't really take care of himself. He continued to eat the way he wanted. He didn't exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So it built up. He developed diabetes, and
Okay.
um,
And so he was in a home
he was
um,
actually in his own apartment
for a while.
for a
How
long
long?
while.
Okay. And then most recently he was in the nursing
Correct. He
home.
was in the nursing home.
Yeah.
So, but just before he went into the nursing home, I started helping him, taking him to the doctors, doing some groceries, laundry, and, just helping him.
So you do all that, you do the funeral planning, and there you are at a funeral, memorial service, celebration of life, whatever we want to call it,
Right.
at the church, for a man. And we'll get into some of the reasons for this, but
Mm.
is your ex-husband, lots of baggage, and yet you still love him, but
Well,
also
I love him in the Lord.
exactly not love him like you'd still want to be married to him, love
Correct.
him totally.
Yes.
And yet you're kind of still the primary, you're planning the funeral, you're
Hmm.
doing all of that. What's that like? What's the emotions?
It was very difficult,
Yeah.
but I really believed that the Lord wanted me to do this.
Why? Why'd you believe that?
I don't know. It was like I was reading in a devotional, and it said, if you keep hearing something in your head, a thought in your head about something,
Yeah.
and it happens often, you should start listening, because it could be the Holy Spirit telling
Yeah.
you that you need, this is what you should be doing.
Yeah, and I think the key with something like that is, does it line up with scripture? And obviously that does.
It does.
It doesn't mean you had to do that, but
No.
you're feeling impressed to still serve this man who's brought a lot of pain,
Hmm.
and yet you didn't have to serve him in that way, but that voice in your head, that's certainly not unbiblical to love even, I don't want to say
Love
your
your
enemy,
enemies.
but
No,
in
but
a way he was.
but those are the thoughts that came through my mind.
Yeah.
And even some thoughts like, oh, you should get an apartment and have him move in, and then you can take care of. And I'm like, there is no way I want to live with him again.
Yeah.
But I do want to help him, because I just felt compassion toward him.
Mm.
Nobody else in the family could truly understand that.
Yeah.
And it didn't matter. So when he did have to go into the nursing home, I said I was going to be his advocate
Yeah.
for his health,
Yeah.
because he didn't understand a lot of things about the medical. He didn't know how to express himself correctly in a lot of ways.
Was he surprised that you were willing to help him in the way you did at the end?
He was
Not
surprised.
necessarily right at the end, but even the
Yeah,
apartment.
he was a little bit surprised, but he was very grateful.
Okay.
And he didn't really tell me very often. We would still have our head-to-heads.
But
And
you'd hear others, oh, he's really grateful.
he would tell everybody, she's the best thing that ever happened to me. I messed up. I wished I would have been better. She's just so wonderful. She's the only woman I loved. And so I didn't hear those things until people told me afterwards.
There's a lesson in that, huh?
Hmm.
It's like, tell people. Tell people
Absolutely.
if you feel that way. I mean, obviously, it might have been awkward for him. I'm not saying he had to go into that much detail, but it would have been nice for you to have heard it instead of hearing it from someone else.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying that's why you did it, obviously,
No.
but I think, you know, in his case, it might have been a bit of an extreme example, but I think we can all be guilty of that sometimes, of telling others how much I love my wife or something like that. And it's like,
Right.
tell her or
Right.
tell him,
Yeah.
you know, whoever it is in your life that
Exactly.
they need to hear it, you know, even if it's a card or something like that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So let's take it back, though. I just wanted to start with that since that's kind of the end, and we'll work our way back up. You got married to Gary. How old were you?
15.
15.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
We dated for a while, and I got pregnant.
so you got pregnant, and that's the main reason. So let's talk about that a little bit. I know it's a few years ago.
Just a few.
So you get pregnant. You got to you're dating him. You get pregnant. You're not a Christian at this point.
Oh, no.
Clear. Neither is he. And you have to tell your parents, right? What was that like? That whole situation, and how did it end up in marriage? Because it doesn't have to be, right?
No, it doesn't have to be.
No.
And my mom just took it like, well,
The marriage piece or the pregnant piece?
the pregnancy part.
Yeah.
And she says, well, you know, you have to make a choice. You can get married, or you can give the baby away, or just keep it and not get married.
Right.
Because that was her life.
Mm.
When I grew up, she was a single mom, and I didn't know. I knew who my father was as I got older, but I didn't know him. I didn't know him at all. I remember one of the visions, it was a yellow plane up in the sky, and the plane would tilt. He had his pilot's license, and he owned a plane.
Oh.
And he would tilt it, and it's like, oh, there's Dad. And that was what I thought.
Wow.
And come to find out, you know, my mom had 3 children with him. He had another family, a whole totally other family, which like lived not that far. So it wasn't, so to me, it was like,
He was just fly by his different families and tilt his
yeah,
plane.
I guess so. And since then, I have met a half brother. And that's a whole other story, but he's a very devout Catholic. He loves the Lord. And he just said, when we met, he said, you know, that's their sin, not ours. We don't hold on to that. And so it was good.
but you mentioning that, I mean, it kind of makes some sense that you had no real influence of what a godly marriage family.
Oh, absolutely not.
So the pregnancy happens, and then what do I do? And your poor mom's trying to do her best to try to tell you what
absolutely.
to do. But you don't have it. That's a really good spot for a dad to step in and help and lead. And you didn't have that. And so now you got to make these decisions.
Yeah, I think for many, many years, if I would have had a dad, I wouldn't have lived the life that I did.
Yeah. So you decide to get married. Now, again, it's a while ago, but how did you feel? Did you feel positive, like, hey, this is going to be great? Or were you like, I don't know, we're really young, but we have a baby and we got to try to make this work? How was your feeling going into it?
Yeah, it was probably, this is what I had to do.
How old was he? Same age?
He was 17. He had just turned 18.
Okay.
So we just said, we have to take control of what you know, not suffer the consequences, but yes, suffer the consequences of our actions. You know, we just, so we had to go through social workers from the state. We had to have to appear in family court and to sit before a judge. And after all that paperwork, and we sat, and it was funny because Gary's mother was totally against us getting married, and it took a long time before we found out it was because I was Catholic, they were Lutheran.
Okay.
And when I told her I would have them baptized in the Lutheran church, because
you were.
That didn't matter to me. We were Catholic, but not practicing at all.
Yeah, you weren't.
No, and like my father, I knew about God, but I didn't know God.
Yeah.
And so we went before the judge, and and he just looked
Did
at the
you live on your
paperwork.
own at first, or did you need help with the family? It's
We
pretty young.
stayed at my mom's. Gary had a full-time job.
Yeah.
He had quit school and he went to work, and he had a full-time job. So 2 weeks after we got married, we moved into a small apartment.
Mm-hmm.
And from that point on, we had our own
Wow.
living spaces.
Wow.
It was kind of like playing house.
Why?
I don't know. It was like, it almost didn't seem, I don't, like a real life. I'm not sure how to say that. I mean,
Because you were so young?
I think so,
Yeah.
but I
You're supposed to
knew,
be finishing high school and doing all
yeah.
that, and
But
you're,
that was one of the things I didn't mind
yeah.
leaving high school. I
Yeah.
didn't like high school at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
So, where, what was it in the beginning with that marriage? Did it work out okay, or did it kind of have its rough patches
oh,
right
it had a
away?
rough
How come?
patches. Well, Gary and I both drank.
Yeah.
And then
What does that mean? Like got
like
drunk kind of
he
thing?
he did more so than I did, but there were a couple of occasions that
Yeah.
we did, especially as we got a little bit older.
Yeah.
And so there were rough patches.
Yeah. If you're both drinking, you end up in
Yeah.
a lot of fights that maybe
Yes.
would not happen.
Right.
Yeah. And you're
Exactly.
so young.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But we continued on. I had a second son a year and a half later.
Was that on purpose, that one?
No,
Okay.
none of our children. Well, yes, I shouldn't say that. My youngest son I did pray for because it was after I became a Christian.
Okay. But the first two were not, well, the first
So,
obviously not planned, and then
right.
the
So
second
we
one.
went on for about 9 years, and it got so bad. It got to the point where, um, you know, we were both smoking pot. We were drinking. He was drinking a lot,
Hmm.
and he yelled a lot. He screamed a lot. He was ordering me around.
When he drank, or
When he drank, he was worse.
yeah, okay.
Like,
Yeah.
even other times, there was still the yelling and stuff.
Was the drinking like mostly at home? Did he go out at the
Oh, he
bar?
went out
Okay.
a lot.
Yeah. So all your money was going towards all that stuff too. I mean, it's not like you
Exactly.
were wealthy.
No,
So,
but by then I was working as well.
yeah.
And I just remember being at work one day, and a woman shared with us that she was going through a divorce,
Mm,
that her husband was mean. And she says, I got to go back to the apartment and get my cat, my little kitty.
yeah.
And all her friends were saying, no, 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 don't do that. And she did anyway. And he ended up finding her there, and he ended up strangling her and killing her.
Oh my gosh.
So that was in my mind. And so Gary and I got to the point where I said,
Did you really have that kind of fear? I mean, not that anything can
yes,
escalate, but
no, that's exactly what happened,
had
because
he ever been physical with you?
early on, he hit me once,
Hmm.
but that was my own fault. He came home drunk, and I was in his face.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
Well, I know what you mean. You could have been
so,
wiser, but own fault, no.
right.
You never
Well,
deserved to be.
no, that's true. But
Yeah.
I can understand why he did it.
Right. You should have
And so I
given
called
him
the
space.
police. They
Yeah.
came, they took him, made him take a walk and stuff, and then
It was
he
different
came
time.
back home.
Different
It
time.
was a different time. Yes.
What, like, around when was that? Not the date.
Probably 1972.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very different time.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then he never hit me again. He wouldn't, and he never hit the kids. He wasn't
Okay.
violent in that way,
Just verbally.
just verbally abusive.
And did that get worse as time went
It
on?
did. And so
Yeah.
I came to the point where I said, I have to leave. I'm taking the boys and I'm leaving. And
How
so
many? You had been 8, 9 years married
about,
when you
yeah,
decided that?
about 9 years, I think.
In all of that, you're drinking, smoking, he's drinking, all that stuff. You got kids. Do you remember any thoughts about God at all?
Yes. I remember my grandmother telling me,
Hmm.
always remember that Jesus has something special for you.
Hmm. Was your grandmother Catholic?
She was very Catholic.
Yeah.
I remember sleeping over their houses, and they used to go to 6 o'clock mass every day. every morning. So if I slept over, no matter what day it was, we went to 6 a.m.
Yeah,
mass.
that's I mean, there was more of that back then,
Yes,
than there is
yes,
today.
right.
But yeah, that's legit right there. So you remember that and that influenced you
I
to some
remember
degree.
that. I remember
Did that
that.
give you some hope or something?
Well,
Or
and then I met a woman at the hospital. Her son and my son we were both of us were waiting for the doctor, the same pediatrician, to contact us. So she started talking to me. She was originally from Texas. And then when after we talked to the doctor, we got up to leave and she said, "Do you mind if I pray with you?" And I was like, "Oh boy."
here we go.
Yep, I know. It was like 1977 or so. And I said, "Okay." And so she prayed, and it was so sincere and so wonderful. And
Yeah.
we kind of kept in contact a little bit. So
It's hard to do
that
that back
was,
then too. It's not like you could just shoot text messages and stuff. You
no,
you'd actually have to
exactly.
call or see.
Or
Yeah.
write to each other. She used
Yeah.
to send me a card once in a while,
Okay.
and just to keep in touch. And
Yeah.
so when I got to the point, I said, "I'm leaving." So I told him, and I didn't know it at the time, but he had already been drinking a bit. And he just flew off the handle and he screamed and hollered and he said, "You're not going anywhere. I'll kill you before you go anywhere."
So that
And
was this
I
after
lost
your
it.
coworker?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're like,
So
really? That's no joke. Yeah.
I kind of lost it. I started crying. I ran into the bathroom and I'm screaming, crying. What am I going to do? God, you have to help me. God, you have to help me. And I was so upset and scared. And I cannot say anything except all of a sudden, I wasn't angry. I wasn't afraid. And I felt, all of a sudden, I knew God was in control. And if that's the way it was going to go, that's the way it was going to go. So I went back out there, calm as could be. I was like shocked at myself. And I just said, "All right, Gary, well, if that's what you have to do, then you have to do that. But I'm making arrangements and I'm leaving." And I'm here, so evidently
Didn't kill
he
you.
didn't kill me.
But that's got to be a weird might be the wrong word, but you're not a believer at that point. It's not like today that happens. It's still amazing when God gives us that kind of
Absolutely.
calm, but we know where it's coming from. We get it. But for someone like you didn't really pray. You kind of had
But I did
a
ask,
semi.
I did say, "God help me."
Absolutely. That's a
And
beautiful prayer.
that's
and
what he
did.
wanted to hear, and he gave me that peace. And it took a long, well, I shouldn't say that long, because it was while we were separated, and we were only separated 9 months, but it was
Okay.
while we were separated,
Where did you go while you were separated? Back to your
I
parents
went
or something? Your
into
mom?
a project. We had
You were in Rhode Island, right?
in Woonsocket, and we
Yeah.
grew up in a project. That's where we met. We had our small apartment. After the baby was born, we moved back into the project, and we lived there for many years. Then we moved out of the project, but I moved back in with my two sons.
Okay. So in that 9 months, when you first make that move, you're coming off of that prayer, God clearly being with you. Did you right away say, I gotta do something about this, with the Lord, or was it now a little bit distant because real life, quote unquote,
No,
has to take over?
I think I started searching after,
Yeah.
because at that time I was working at the Woonsocket Head Start, and one of the teachers went to the Lutheran church, and she taught Sunday school. So I went with her a few times to get involved, but that didn't last long.
Yep.
Life got busy, and
You
I
got
was
two boys,
two
how old?
boys.
They're like,
9 and 10 and a half,
yeah,
8, yeah,
yeah.
9 and 7 and a half. So
So yeah, so sorry, go ahead. I'll wait and ask
well,
that question.
then then Gary's sister and another sister-in-law visited me and started telling me about Jesus. They had started my sister-in-law had gotten saved, and they were attending the South Attleboro Assembly, and she said, "You've got to come." And so I went, and I felt peace, and I loved hearing about the Lord. And I think that I was searching, and I think God was opening himself up to me.
Yeah, without a doubt.
And within that time period, I did accept the Lord. And I was still going to the assembly in South Attleboro, and I would see couples, and Gary was always, even at that time, he was always asking me to come back, telling me he loved me.
I was going to ask that. So you have contact with Gary
all the time,
but he hasn't changed any habits or anything.
No,
I'll be better, but I'm still going to drink all the time, and
so I would see couples at the church, and they're so happy. They're so, Lord, what do I do? Do I go back to him? Do I? And so,
what did your sons? I mean,
they were young.
They're young, but they were old enough.
Yeah, but
to say, hey, we'd like to go back with Dad, or
they never
really
expressed. And I think, unfortunately, I was a lot like my mom, where we didn't have a whole lot of educated conversations.
Yeah.
Like, I didn't really know how to be a mom. I tried the best. The same thing with my mom. She was a mom, but she was very distant. I don't remember a lot of affection and hugs and things like that.
Yeah.
So I think I was probably the same way with the boys, and I just made the decisions, and maybe they just said, well, she's the boss, so.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
But so I went home one night, and I was praying, and I opened the Bible and came to 1 Corinthians, and it says a wife should not separate from her husband. But if she does, I missed that first little section, she should become reconciled. So I said, okay, Lord, then I'll go back to him. Yeah. And so I told him I'd go back. I said, but you have to remember, I'm not coming back alone. And he said, what are you talking about? I said, Jesus is coming home with me.
Oh, how did that was a phone conversation you had with him?
No, it was a face-to-face conversation.
Okay.
And he said, okay.
Why do you, and maybe you've talked about this since, but why was he so adamant for you to come back? I mean, he obviously has said he's always loved you, but is it because he just missed you, even though he treated you pretty terribly?
Yeah.
Did he miss the boys?
He did miss the boys.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they started playing Little League, and he was very much, he loved going to watch them, and even like assisted coaching, got involved in that. But yeah, he just wanted us to continue to be a family.
Yeah. And so he was okay that Jesus was coming with you?
For a while.
Didn't understand what that really meant.
No, he didn't. So he started getting upset about all the time that I was spending at church, because I now started going to the Woonsocket Assembly of God, and the 3 services, Sunday morning, Sunday night, midweek studies. And I was there at all the services because I wanted to know the Lord. But we still struggled, and I prayed.
Had anything changed when you came back?
Just that I changed. He still hadn't changed. He
that
changed
helps a lot,
little
right?
bit.
You're like, as the word says, you're the grace through you, because you're trying to live for the Lord, but you're still a young believer.
Correct.
But you're now dealing with maybe some of these situations very differently than you used to.
And I had, I was more assertive in the fact that, no, this is what's going to happen. This is how I'm going to be. I'm not changing that, because God told me. I felt one day I came home from church when I was in South Attleboro, when we were still separated, but I came home and I sensed, this is forever. This is not just a fad. This is permanent. This is forever.
Right. Yeah.
And so I had that in my heart. So I said, if you're not going to agree to that, then I won't be here for long.
Right.
So he kind of held back and laid back a little bit. And I began to pray for another child because of being a Christian and knowing the Lord and knowing what a blessing children are. And Gary was not happy after I got pregnant. He was not happy at all. And I didn't plan it, but again, I got pregnant.
Right.
And it was very soon after I prayed too.
Yeah.
So then we had to move again because now we needed the third bedroom.
Yeah.
And he was okay with it. He loved Chad.
Yeah.
And the boys did too. They, this little brother, they loved antagonizing him. And so things got a little bit better. He still drank. And when Chad was 6 months old, I went to a women's retreat and I was praying. I spent a lot of time in the prayer room, and I was just talking to the Lord about the situation with Gary's drinking, and that's not good. This is not going to, it's not good for our family. And so Gary would say, and I think if you read his testimony, that he just quit on his own. He says, but my wife was praying at a retreat. A coincidence? I don't think so. And he even admitted that, all of a sudden he quit drinking, but I had been praying. So he knew it was a connection.
At what point in your marriage was that? How old was Chad?
6 months old.
Oh, so he had just pretty much been born.
Right.
So you're at the retreat praying for this.
He was at home getting drunk because he wouldn't watch Chad while I went. The other boys were home. So I had someone watch him for me. And he was home and he got drunk, really drunk. He got so drunk, he got sick. And he was sick for a long time, like for days.
Oh, my goodness.
And then he just stopped drinking. I can't drink anymore. This is ridiculous.
And he just stopped.
Wow.
Wow. How did he...
But he didn't change.
He went to meetings, things like
Nope.
that? No.
No, he just stopped drinking, but he was still...
That's interesting. So he completely stops drinking, but he doesn't really change. So what kinds of behaviors didn't change?
Well, still...
Angry?
Everything was his way. If we did something that was not the way he liked it. The other thing was, he would get mad at those things, but some days were okay, and then other days they bothered him. So we kind of never knew, the boys included. We never knew when we got home. What was it going to be like? Was he going to be mad at us today, or was he going to be in a good mood?
So how did you feel when you found out he quit drinking?
I was hopeful.
You were also like, we'll see if this actually pans out, right?
Right. But I
That's
was thinking, God,
this could really make some,
yeah, this is, and I believe that he would get saved.
Yeah.
Someday, because like you said, it says that your witness, and because further on in that 1 Corinthians 7, it says, how do you know, wife, if you will not save your husband? Not that I would save him, but that my testimony.
Right.
But I was not very nice either.
What do you mean?
Well, I would fight back with him, and I would yell at him, and I would still get involved in, like defending us, but I still wasn't showing the grace of God during those years.
How you went about it sometimes.
Exactly.
How was that going through those years, trying to trust Christ, but also this constant, nightmare?
Yeah, it was kind of just like, I just got myself involved in church. And the boys,
almost in a way.
It was.
Yeah.
It was.
Show up to church with the kids, and the husband doesn't come with, and
right. And then it got to the point when the boys got older. The two older boys, they didn't want to go to church anymore, and he firmly said, "They don't have to go. If they don't want to go, they don't have to go. You're not making them."
Yeah.
And so I just took Chad, And he never argued about me taking Chad. I don't know why, but he never argued about that. And he just let me continue on. I guess he felt like, I was out of his hair. Maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's another example of something we've talked about here on how important dad is when it comes to the Christian faith, and mom can be as faithful as the day is long. And it doesn't mean it doesn't matter, but statistically speaking, it has very little effect on kids. Whereas all dad really has to do is show up to church, and the kids will continue to. It's like 80% more likely if dad goes.
Right.
And it's like 20% continue to go to church if just mom does. And it's because that's what God, and I say this for those who need encouragement, especially the men, like you showing up, even if you think like, man, I'm barely able to pay attention, I'm barely able to do what I want to do. Just showing up makes all the difference in the world for your kids. And it's just because that's God designed you to.
Because God is our Father.
Yeah. And he's put human fathers there to be an example.
Absolutely.
And a model. And it's built in. Like it is a built-in compass, if you will, to look to dad and say, and for good or bad, it's a lot of power. Mom, we love mom, especially sons, but really sons and daughters. We love mom, and we're so grateful for mom, and she's so important. But as far as our life decisions, dad is so much more important. And it's just, that's how God wired it. And I know you're not supposed to say that these days, but it's just.
That's the truth.
It's the truth, right?
We speak the truth.
Yeah, yeah. So you're in a situation with a lot of, well, men and women, but I definitely feel like, especially back then, and even now, it's usually more like if not both are going to church and Christians, it's usually the woman. Did you have anyone else in church that could relate to you in that husband doesn't come?
There were some. As a matter of fact, my sister-in-law Claire came to church with me. The first time I was doing children's church, and it was a snowstorm, and I had to get to church, and they happened to live downstairs from us, and I said, I asked her if she could please come with me. I said, I've got things to carry, and we had to walk.
Wow.
So she walked with me. She was a very faithful friend.
Yeah.
And
really.
She started coming to church after that and became a believer. So,
oh, wow. God used that
then,
snowstorm.
yeah, and then years later, she came back at me and said, "You owe me one." So I needed to help her with something at church.
Yeah.
But
so you're in that space. Are you? What are you thinking about your marriage and family, if anything? Or you're just like, hey, it's just this is what it is. His wife. Were there good days and bad days, or just less bad and
well, there were
worse?
less bad days with Gary.
Yeah.
But family, but there were more struggles because then when Chad was 4, he developed leukemia. And so all of a sudden now the older boys kind of were almost like pushed to the background.
Well, that's a lot.
And they were older, I think 16, 14 and a half. So that became our concentration.
Yeah.
And it was all on me because Gary didn't know how to deal with it.
Right.
So I was the caregiver. I would take him to all his treatments, go with him when he spent overnight. He had part of his protocol was to be in the hospital for 3 days, getting high doses of chemotherapy. So I would go and I would stay with him for those 3 days. And
what was your faith like during that? You already got marriage that's rough. And now my son has leukemia. Lord, what is this about?
The day that we found out, well, actually the next morning, I had to drive home by myself. Gary was with me, And when they gave us the definite, diagnosis, his brother had come, so he went home with his brother. I stayed until Chad fell asleep, and then I went home. When I was driving home, I I got lost in Providence, and I wasn't sure because the one exit that I knew how to get back to Woonsocket had been closed. So now I was just driving around, and it's like I started crying, and Lord, you've got to help me find my way home. And then when I got to the highway, 146, I lost it. And I said, God, you have to drive. And I was, just sobbing and sobbing because of my son.
Of course.
And all the way home, I don't remember driving. I don't remember. I just remember being in connection with the Lord and praying. And when I got to Woonsocket, I stopped at a light, and it was like I almost heard. It was in May, so my window was open, but it was like I heard, I'm in control. And again, I felt that peace. And so it just became a new routine now. Once a week we'd go to the clinic, we'd get his blood work. They'd find out what his blood were, and then they'd give him his chemotherapy.
Go to Boston or Worcester? Or?
It was in Providence.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's maybe there was a good reason for this, but to me, the picture you painted of Gary leaving, like I just can't imagine doing that in a situation like that. Leaving my wife and 4-year-old who's got just diagnosed with leukemia, like I'm not going anywhere. Like unless there's some emergency or something. Like that is the emergency.
Right.
But he left with his brother and left you to
go home. Well, we had been there all night.
Yeah.
We had stayed all I know.
And I'm not trying to blame him. I'm
know.
just to me it's like you're kind of on your own with these stuff.
Yeah,
things.
it was a different lifestyle for us.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's because we both grew up without fathers. His father was an alcoholic, and he was never around with Gary growing up. To us, it was normal.
But the blessing is God stepped in where a husband should have been. Not that he's your husband, but you know what I mean? Like, I got this.
Right.
Not that he still wouldn't, but he needed to have it in a way that maybe you wouldn't have needed if you had someone else to drive the car.
Maybe. Yeah, I never
If
thought
you're
of it
on your
that
own,
way.
you're freaking out like any mom would. You're exhausted because you're up, it's been all day. And God has to step in there and answer that prayer, and how closer you are to him because of it.
And that's a sister in Christ told me that one time.
Yeah.
She said, I think you have a deeper relationship with God because of what you're going through. She says, our life is pretty easy. We're both Christians, her and her husband, and they just kept going along. And she says, it's really good. But we don't have those kinds of things happening in our life.
Yeah.
And, most recently, I do a lot of contemplating with the Lord, and he's showing me things of why things why things have happened. And he needed me to get closer to him. And a lot of times, some people who are really thick-headed and stubborn and rebellious, and which I was, need to be taught that way. And so I believe that he allowed all of those things to happen to help me to grow in him.
To just trust him.
Yeah.
We're always looking to trust someone else.
And at that same time, with Chad going through that, we had difficulty with our middle son. And I know a lot of it was because of what our lifestyle was with their father.
Sure.
And he was being wayward. He was, we filed a disobedient child report, because that's what you did then. And family court got involved. And we had to go to family court, and the date was set. Well, then Jason disappeared. Like he ran away, and I had
How old was he?
15, I believe.
Yeah.
And I just had no idea where he was. And I remember praying, like kneeling at the window, praying, looking outside, and just asking God to protect him, and how devastated I was that this was going on. And I felt God say, that's a little taste of how I feel for all my children.
Oh.
And I just was like so overwhelmed, but feeling so blessed that God shared that with me. It was amazing. That's how God feels about his children. So, but then things turned out okay. Long story short.
How long was he missing?
Oh, he showed up for family court. He showed up that morning that we were going, and he came and, showered and got changed and came with us. And so all they did actually was said that DCYF is going to have custody, but they're going to place him at home. So there was nothing happened. But he changed. And when he was old enough, he moved out. The same thing with our oldest son. As soon as they were of age, they both left. So we were home alone with Chad. And things just continued on, and I kept going to church.
You have your middle son. He's family court. You got Chad with leukemia. Got this going on with Gary, your husband. Man, that's a lot. That's a real lot. And that I'm sure there had to have been some moments where you're like, God, yes. I can't do this anymore.
Absolutely. I remember one day specifically. I was laying in my room. It was during the day. I don't know if I was going there to take a nap or whatever, but I just remember saying those exact words to God. I can't do this anymore. I just can't do it. I don't want to go on. I can't do it. And all of a sudden, 1 Corinthians 10:13 came to mind. No temptation has overcome you except what's common to mankind. But God is faithful. He will never give you any more than what you can bear. And
it sure does feel that way.
When you go through these trials, he will provide a way out so that you're able to endure it. And I said, I know. And I kind of like heard him say, are you calling me a liar? It's like, no. And he said, get up and go on.
So your job is just to go on and do your best to be obedient.
Yes.
And faithful. Even though everywhere you turn, it feels like it's not working out. It's not good.
No.
There's not a lot to be like, at least that.
Yeah. Well, I just knew that.
Does it become almost a day-by-day process? I mean, probably even moment by moment, but like, hey, let's get through today. How do you approach that?
It was almost like it was just the way it was.
Right. You really hadn't had a lot of experience of something that was greater.
No, probably not.
Imagine if you didn't know the Lord during that time.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how I...
Well, you never probably would have went back.
No, I probably wouldn't have. I wouldn't have had Chad.
Right.
But there were lots of times that I was depressed. I suffered from depression, and I a few times thought of suicide, but I couldn't.
Yeah, you had your boys, and
exactly.
You knew that's not what God wanted.
Exactly.
But yeah, when it feels like there's no way out, and you were young, I mean, it's like this is going to be the rest of my life.
I still had hope, though.
Yeah.
For some reason, I had hope that Gary would be saved. And Chad was attending a Christian. He was attending South Attleboro Day Spring Academy, and he would always come home and he'd have memory verses, and he was just this little guy, 3 and 4 years old, and he would always say, "So, Dad, when are you going to ask Jesus to be your savior?" when are you going to come to church? And and Gary thought that I would put him on. I said, I'm not putting him up to that. That's all on him.
Yeah.
And then one time, a friend of Gary's that they grew up with, he had become a Christian. And he was actually a singer with his daughter, and they used to, go to different churches and, minister. And so he came to the church that I was attending, and we were all leaving, and he said goodbye, and he's driving away, and then he backs right up, and he says, Rolande, I never do this, but I just felt God tell me to tell you Gary will be saved. And that brought so much hope in my life.
Yeah.
And it took 20 years almost.
After that, or?
After I went back to him.
Okay.
So it was from that time, and about 20 years later, Gary did accept the Lord.
So at that point, Chad's
19.
19-ish, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you had a lot of years there where we're not talking about a few weeks.
No, it was a lot of years. But I just kept going. And again, I would have times of depression. God would get me through. But I continued to stay and be involved in church. And God would keep me involved.
Yeah.
Like I said, my sister-in-law said I owed her, and it was to go with her on a weekend camp out with 4 girls in a tent. Because it was called Missionettes. It was a girls' group, and they once a year go to what they called Powette. And because the boys had Royal Ranges and they used to have powwow. So the girls had, so it was all connected. And
sort of a Native American feel to this, huh?
Yeah, right? It was very rustic on the ground. And but their leader, my sister-in-law, was a helper, and the one that was the coordinator just up and left the church for some reason. And so the girls had already paid their money. They were obligated. That's what my sister-in-law, and I don't want the girls to miss out, she said, but I need someone else to come with me.
Right.
And you owe me.
She hadn't forgotten the trip in the snow.
No, she had not. And so I said, okay. I don't know. You
kind of came to Christ because of that. I think you owe me.
Right? Yeah. No, she only owes God. So I said, okay. And I remember that day, it was like, oh, why did I say I would do this? And I'm throwing my sleeping bag and my luggage. And we lived on the 3rd floor, so I was throwing them down the stairs, not even carrying them. I was so upset. But I went. And, I mean, we had fun with the girls, activities. And I didn't really like girls, though. I grew up not liking myself, having a very low self-image, feeling, because I knew I didn't have a father. It was a whole kind of ugly society back then, in my neighborhood anyway, and I felt it. But we had fun, and the last night, so it was Friday night, no, it was Saturday, all day Saturday, and then Saturday night. Friday night we got there, and they had a service. And then on Saturday night, they had a service again, and the woman that was leading it was just praying out loud, and everybody was praying, and she says, there is somebody here right now that God is telling you that you need to be a leader in this group. And all of a sudden, I thought I was having a heart attack to the pressure on my heart. And my heart started beating faster and faster. It's like, oh, Lord, that can't be me. And it was. Yeah. So I got involved in missionettes and learned to love the girls. And I was there. And so those are the things that kept me. Right. God kept me busy.
But what a testimony to anyone, because, we bring this up a lot, but it's like, you can't, people are sometimes just so like, I plan everything out. So I'm going to plan out my Christian walk too. I'm good at this, or I like this. And sure, I mean, a lot of times God gives us abilities, talents, and
You know
passions
exactly
that
where
line
to,
up, right?
yes.
To use for his glory. But often he calls you to do something that you don't think you're going to like. And if you feel that, just, whether it's the heart beating when someone's praying or in church, or just feel like I should do that, I should lead that group, I should just do it.
Right.
And the more you're kicking and screaming, probably the better sign it is, because it's not coming from you.
No, absolutely, absolutely. And I was more blessed than I think the girls were.
That's almost always what happens when you do any kind of ministry, but especially with children or with teenagers, and you end up being, that's where I grew when I started helping with youth ministry. And I don't know how much I helped any of the teenagers at the back then.
I'm sure you did.
I'm sure, but
but we don't. Yes.
I was probably less mature than some of them, but God did so much, and it's just like such a great testimony to just be faithful to what he's calling you to do, no matter how scary or burdensome it might seem.
And you just have a sense of well-being with the Lord, knowing that, yes, he told me to do this, I'm doing it. And, it was not always easy. It was a lot of work, a lot of preparing, a lot of, and
yeah, but what I really love that you'll never brag about because you're too humble, but how you stayed faithful to God's calling when you could have got callous or angry and said, I don't see where anything good is happening. Not that you didn't have anything good, but overall kind of a mess.
Yeah.
Marriage, kids.
It's funny you say that, because it was not long after that. So it was about 2011. Gary had gotten saved 2002. And I thought, so I had really high expectations when he got saved.
How did that happen? Did he come to church? Did he go to...
Well, he actually got involved in our church softball league.
Oh, yeah, right. I saw that in the testimony.
Yeah. So he loved baseball, softball, everything like that.
Yep.
And he was playing on beer leagues every Sunday. That was his reason he couldn't come to church.
Sunday morning beer leagues.
Yes,
nice.
right.
Jeez.
Yep. Play softball all morning and drink all afternoon. But then he found out, I found out that the church had a softball team. So I said, hey, our church has a softball team. Because then he stopped the leagues, after he stopped drinking.
Right.
At
that point,
a while after he just stopped playing. But then when I told him about the church,
it's an opportunity to
he
play.
says, oh, all right. So I said, let's go watch them. So we went to one of the games, and so then he talked to the coach, and he started just going to the practices and just playing softball.
Yeah.
And the following year, he decided that he wanted to join the team, and it was an outreach team, actually. Sure. The whole league was an outreach. So they had to have so many players that were non-Christians.
Yeah.
And he loved the coach, and he loved their kids, and they had the youngest daughter was like 2, I believe, and she just adored Gary, and he adored her, and she would always, oh, I love you, Gary, and he would just melt. So one day, and he said that every time the game started, they would go to the plate and they would pray. And a lot of men would, bend their knee, and others, they would all gather. And he said, I just kind of stayed to the back. And then this one day, the coach's daughter came with the mother, and she developed a spiked fever, like immediately, and she had a convulsion. So they called an ambulance, and they took off, and he was devastated. And both teams got around the plate, and they were playing. And he said, I got down on my knee, and I said, God, if you're real, you're going to help this girl. And after the game, a couple of the men went to the emergency room. And when she saw him, she yelled his name and she was fine. And he believed at that time that God answered his prayer, not all the other 20 men that were around praying.
Never know.
Nope, you never know.
Mm.
But then a couple of weeks later, I was at work and he called me and told me that he just accepted the Lord as a savior.
Like just kind of privately?
Yeah.
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 I mean, had he been going to church at all? Or
Oh,
just...
he had to come to church twice a month.
Okay, that was
But
part
he
of it.
came almost every week.
Yeah.
He
So
started,
he was hearing the message.
and he was hearing the message,
Yeah.
and he was with the coach a lot with his family. And I know the coach, they discussed the word, they
Sure.
discussed the Bible. And
Mm.
so it was all of those things that made him realize that he needed Jesus.
Yeah. So you hear, okay, he's not been drinking for quite a while now.
And now he's
Now
saved.
now he's a Christian.
And I'm like,
Everything's going to change.
We're going to go on a mission trip, or we're going to be parents for Teen Challenge. We're going to be a missionary team together. And 10 years go by. No change.
No change at all.
Well, a little bit. There was some change, but not at home.
Okay.
It was still, we still were just...
Did you try any kind of counseling or anything like that?
We tried.
Yeah.
But the biggest problem, what happened was the counselor asked me if he was the love of my life, or I don't know how it was, or I don't know how she worded it. And I am honest, and I had to say no, because I didn't even know if I really loved him as a woman should love her husband.
Right. You committed to him biblically in a godly way, but
Right. That's why I said that at the beginning. There wasn't.
Well, that has to be cultivated, and it hadn't been.
Right.
Yeah.
So when he heard that, he never wanted to go back. Didn't want to try anymore. He said, no, forget it. But yet he still would go to church with me, and we'd still just live the life that we were living.
Yeah.
And then after 10 years...
2011, you said?
2011, close
Ish.
to 2012, 2011, I started really getting angry with God.
Yeah.
I had expectations, and I thought God let me down.
Mm.
So I just left Gary. And by that time, Chad was an adult.
Yeah.
He was married.
All your kids are
All
out.
my kids were gone.
Yeah.
And I just left Gary, but I also left God.
Mm.
And
How do you do that?
I
To leave your Bibles behind and
No, I took it with me.
just didn't open it very much?
No, I didn't. I actually went back. Yeah. I actually went back to a sin of life.
A life of sin, you mean?
I mean, yeah.
That sounds
Okay.
like a muffin or something. Sin of life. I don't know. Or a cereal.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So what do you mean?
So for 3 years, I just lived back in the world. I was drinking. I was going out to clubs with friends from work. Things that I never had done,
Yeah.
even when I
my
was
time.
in the world.
It's my time. My kids
My
are
time.
out.
Yeah.
I'm out. I'm gonna
But
do what
I
want.
was like, yeah, it's actually painful to think about it.
Of course it is.
And
But at the time you're still saved though. So you have the Holy Spirit. So there had to have been a lot of
conviction.
conviction and tension there that you were trying to
Especially
avoid.
because people at work knew me as a Christian.
Yeah.
And they
yeah.
knew how strong I was as a Christian. So I don't even
Did
know
you have
what,
even and were they not Christians?
most of them were
Most
not
of them.
Christians.
Did they ever say, because I find that sometimes they're like disappointed because it's like even if they don't believe, they sort of sort of like the idea that it might be true. And someone like you, like, oh, now you're acting like me. You shouldn't be acting this way.
Right. Yeah, I didn't see a whole lot
Yeah.
of, well, not with the ones I started hanging with,
Yeah.
especially. But
Yeah. They were just
I
happy
I
to
think there were
rope you
other
in.
people that might have. And yet during that time there were still times when people would come into my office and, just start talking about difficulties, and I would talk to them about the Lord,
Yeah.
and I would share the Lord,
Yeah.
and encourage them in the Lord. And yet I
Yeah.
was being a
Not
hypocrite.
going to church
No. I tried finding a church.
because you moved a little bit of away.
I moved like to North Providence, which
Yeah.
was 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And I tried going to a church. There was a little Methodist church right around the corner from my house, so I walked there one day.
Mm-hmm.
And it happened that they didn't have a regular pastor, and the pastor that was there was an Assembly of God pastor.
Oh,
So
I was gonna say, yeah.
it was good sermons, but I didn't kind of like the rituals that they
Yeah.
had,
Very different from what you're used to.
and it was an older crowd.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then, like 3 weeks in, they started asking me, "Oh, can you start helping with this? You
Yeah.
want to
Yeah.
join
Yeah.
the choir? You want?"
Yeah.
And I was like, "Nah, I'm not. I'm not ready for this."
Yeah. Were you still in contact with Gary at that time? Is he trying to get
No,
you to come back, or was he like,
no, it was no. He was very, very angry. He was
Yeah.
very angry that I left. And we didn't have any contact.
did people from your church try to contact you about it?
No, not
No.
a single person.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah, that struck me.
Yeah.
And when I came back to the Lord after 3 years, but during those 3 years, I slowly sunk deeper and deeper into despair, and was very suicidal. And I felt God say, "Come back home." And so
What was that like? Like, was there a moment, or was there just a pressing thought?
it was, I can remember one night, I could feel it strongly, but I didn't think I was worthy enough. I
Yeah.
thought that I had ruined it. So I started seeing a psychologist, and she recommended that I go to, it was Butler Hospital. It's a mental hospital, and they have outpatient. She said, "I think you need something. You need to be doing something." And so I figured that was the Lord's way of getting me away from trying to commit suicide, because I was very suicidal. I thought of it a lot during that time. And so I started going, and I started reading my word again, and I started listening to Christian music a lot.
That can be really important.
It was so good. And
Yeah.
then I was in the program, and I talked with one of the gentlemen that was in the program, and he was a Christian, and he was in there because of a work situation, how he was feeling. I'm not sure of the details, but so he was encouraging to me, and we kind of encouraged each other, and I started turning myself back to the Lord.
Yeah.
And
And this is around 2014, maybe 15, 15-ish.
13, 14.
Okay.
And then I just didn't know what I was going to do, because I was like still depressed, and
Were you
still
divorced or just separated?
we were divorced. I ended up filing for a divorce in
Yeah.
2013.
Okay.
So actually it was probably longer. It was probably 2016 that I came back to the Lord.
Yeah.
And
So when you say you know what you were going to do, like, what am I like in the Lord? What am I going to do, or life wise? What am I going to do, or both?
both. I tried to find a church.
Yeah.
I went back to the assembly.
Mm-hmm.
By then it was a new pastor and a new group, and
Mm-hmm.
I just felt like I didn't belong there anymore.
Yeah.
I still had friends there and stuff, but I don't know if I was like hurt because they never reached out,
Yeah, maybe.
but I just didn't feel like I belonged there. And
Was
so
Gary still going to church, or was he?
no,
Yeah.
no, he had stopped even before I did.
Okay.
Because he had a problem with something the pastor didn't like. And then I said, well, if you don't want to be at this church, maybe we can find another church. And he
Yeah.
said, you would leave this church? You've been here for all these years, like 30 something years. And I said, yeah, you're my husband. You're saved. I said, but just let me help pick the church because I didn't
Right.
trust him.
Yeah.
So anyways, we did try a couple of churches. We never stayed long, and he just didn't want to go to church anymore.
Mm. Yeah.
So I kept looking and just kept searching, but I started reading the word.
Yeah.
And the few churches that I was attending, it was like this. I don't know. I don't feel, and it's not, I know it's not, we don't go by feelings, but I just didn't have the sense that it's where I was
Sure.
supposed to be.
Yeah.
Then a church opened up in North Smithfield. I started attending that church. I was there for a couple of years, and it was okay. It was a very, very small congregation. But then COVID hit, and all of a sudden I started sensing things that were being said from the pulpit that it just didn't seem right. And
some weird things happened during that time, not just in churches everywhere, but
I know,
including churches.
yeah,
You had all the racial stuff happening too, and
yeah, it was just,
yeah.
anyway, I had made a comment because he was all upset about, it was a whole situation, but I made a comment because he was all upset about what a visiting pastor was saying, and I shared with him something, and now I feel like he was addressing it to me, and he was talking to me and another woman, and he said, "What do you think?" And we both said,
None of our business.
we didn't hear any. Well, no, because he did share stuff with us
Yeah.
in a small group.
Yeah.
And I said, I never even suspected that. And neither did she. And I, of course, big mouth me, comes out with, well, maybe God was convicting you of something. Oh, he lost it. And I had to leave. And he wouldn't let me leave. And he confronted me. And he said, you have no respect for me. And I said, I have respect for your position, but you're not my God. And his wife was standing right next to me, and he said, did you hear her? And she said, yeah, you're not. So I ended up staying away for a little while, but I ended up going back to the church.
Yeah.
And then again, there were things happening that I'm not comfortable with, so I left. And then I came here.
You got stuck with Cornerstone.
And I'll tell you, I have grown so much. God has taught me so much in the 2.5 years, almost 3 years now, that I have been here.
Yeah.
He's just blessed me. He has blessed me so much.
Well, I think our prayer for you is that, man, again, struggles are going to always happen, right? Till
Absolutely.
the Lord comes or we go to him. But there is seasons that he'll give us, and it just feels like you were due one.
Yes.
I'm not God, so I can't tell you for sure, but that would seem that you're
even
due
the
one.
season of taking care of Gary,
Yeah.
it was strengthening to me.
What was your relationship with Gary like before you felt that conviction to help him? I mean, were you talking?
We were friends.
Okay.
we were friends.
Yeah.
You know, he wanted more. He
Yeah.
wanted me to go all the time, visit him all. And I said no. I said,
Yeah.
but you know,
Here and
I'll
there.
I'll
And,
I'll be here, and you know, we'll talk, and I'll come and visit, um and I was there for him if he needed someone.
mm-hmm.
You know, so there were times when he would call me late at night. He was having a panic attack,
Yeah.
and so I would pray with him, and I would calm him down, and then he would feel better. So it was kind of, I was still there for support,
Yeah.
moral support, godly support. You know, kept trying to tell him, read the Word, read the
Mm-hmm.
Psalms,
Mm-hmm.
you know, listen to Christian music,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and just encourage him.
Yeah. So what was that like when you knew you were going to have to really step up and be his advocate? Everyone else is like, "Are you nuts?"
Yeah. Well, that's kind of how I asked myself too. Like, I must be crazy. But I said no, because God, I really believe this is what you're telling me.
Mm.
And so I did. And people would,
What
oh,
did that entail? Being his advocate, like what kinds
well,
of...
I became his power of attorney for medical decisions when he couldn't,
Yep.
when he wasn't able to. He got onto hospice almost right away. Because he was seriously ill. I don't even think he realized, and I didn't realize how
Yeah.
bad he really was.
Yeah. And so then visiting him, and then I mean, by the time
the
I went to visit him, you're there a lot.
I
You
was
know
there.
everybody, you know all of his
Oh,
caregivers.
yes.
You're bringing him stuff. I mean,
Yes.
no one would probably, if no one asked, they would assume you were his wife.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
because they would ask me, "Are you his wife?" And
Right. 'Cause
I
who else would do
say,
something like that?
and then, but then Gary would, no, she's my ex-wife,
Yeah.
being like so proud that I was there, even though I was his ex-wife.
Yeah. Yeah. What a testimony even to him right to the end.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
And there were times after we've had like I would argue with, you know, he was hard to be around sometimes, and I would just lose it and say, okay, that's it, I'll be back another time.
Mm.
And I would get home and I would feel the conviction of the Holy Spirit. I needed to apologize to him
Yeah.
because what I did was wrong.
Right.
Doesn't matter what he did to me, but what I did to him was wrong.
Mm.
So I would go back the next day and I would apologize. And he'd look at me like, what? And it's
Yeah.
like, I
That's
was
what we do. We just fight it out and leave it there. You're
Yeah,
like, no,
and-
that's
yeah, no, that's
no.
not the right way to do it.
No.
And I had to, I felt I had to apologize for all the years that I may have made him believe that he was no good, because I know I said a lot of things, and I needed to do that. It wasn't easy when I felt that I had to do that, but I
Right, 'cause
knew
you could easily just say, well, most of this is his fault.
right.
The reason I felt that way was his fault.
But it
But you needed to own your piece of it.
absolutely, and I was not the best either.
Right. Because you're a human being and you're a sinner just like all of us.
Absolutely.
But I think that's in studying reconciliation and in the process of reconciliation, it can't happen if both parties
True.
don't own it.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, true reconciliation doesn't mean you're going to hate each other, be worst enemies, but true reconciliation needs to come where even if you look at a situation like, man, he really messed up or she really messed up, and it's hard to really even know what this other person did, there's at least a 10%, there's something that you can own and say, man, if I had been more patient or if I had done
Absolutely.
this, regardless of how that might have
Mm-hmm.
added or not, it wasn't how God wanted me to be.
Right.
So it was sin.
And I believe that I was wrong in leaving Gary and getting a divorce,
Mm-hmm.
because I felt so much guilt over that.
Well, it most likely led you to your full on, because you knew if you have someone who's with you all the time going, this is the wrong decision, this is the wrong decision, and you want to do it anyway, you're going to make the decision and leave that person behind, which is what God was doing.
Mm-hmm.
He couldn't leave him behind because he's God, but that's what you
Right.
try to do. Obviously, it's not like you, because some people could be like, hey, I'm going to leave my husband, but I'm still going to go to church, and I'm going to, because I'm not, and that's sometimes
Right.
it's okay. I mean, there are times where divorce is biblical and lawful, but that clearly wasn't the situation for you, and you were like,
No, it
I'm
wasn't.
out.
I'm
To
out.
do that, I got to leave God.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. I'm going to do it my way.
Yeah.
Not Frank Sinatra, but I'm going to do it my way. And over the years,
hard,
the
though.
Lord
Yeah.
convicted me. You know,
Yeah.
I felt guilty. I felt guilty. And the Lord said, don't feel guilty.
Yeah.
And
The
go
cross
back.
is enough.
Go back and read 1 Corinthians
Yeah.
7. Wife should not separate from her husband, but if she does, she should remain single or become reconciled. And I said, remain single? Why didn't I see that? And he said, no, because I wanted you to go back with him at that time.
Yeah. Well, you know, in a way, you did go back to him. I realize you didn't get remarried, and you didn't
Right.
live with him, but for a lot of that, he was in a home, and you know. But if you think about, if you were his wife, you probably wouldn't have done much more than what you actually did.
No, you're right.
Anyway.
Well, so when I was in, I had gone through a couple of years with a counselor.
Yeah.
After I completed that program, that day program. And we would talk about, I would talk about the Lord all the time. And he would gently say, and in the secular world, this is what that means. So he would try to tell me the psychology of what I was feeling and and
which there's something to it, because God is the God over the secular world, right?
Absolutely.
It's same with like business. People are like, oh, you shouldn't operate a church like business. And I'm like, well, I think it's the opposite. Not that we're a business. There's organizational structures that are very biblical and actually work really well because they come from God.
Exactly.
They're orderly and they work.
Extra, not the 10 Commandments, but
Yeah.
all those
So
extra
much.
things that God told Moses.
Yeah, remember when Moses was
know?
trying to do it all? He's like, his father-in-law said, Jethro was like, no, you gotta delegate and you gotta set some stuff up.
No, but even the washing and the
Yeah.
and different, all those laws.
So the church is never borrowing from the world. We do sometimes when it's wrong, but to me, so the same with that. It's like, oh, this is how we have described this. This plays out this way, and these are often the consequences of this. Like, oh yeah, but that's scriptural because God, that's But it was his way of explaining it.
Exactly. And then he said something to me one day, and he said, you shouldn't feel guilty, because he says, you're actually fulfilling your wifely duties.
Yeah.
Now, this was before Gary was even in the nursing home.
Right, but you were.
But I was still helping him and doing things for him. And so I just was like, wow. Okay. Thank you. I think God just used you.
Well, in the secular, what we would say.
So he said to me, what do you mean by that? And I said, your words, I think he used you as a vessel to express to me what I should not feel guilty about.
Yeah.
Because I was doing that, and I never got married, and yet I was still taking care of Gary.
Well, I think the lesson that anyone can take from that is that we are a mess.
Oh,
Okay.
oh yes.
All of us.
Big
for,
mess.
For what? And life's a mess. So it's not just like because you're a mess, but Gary's an absolute mess, and then other people are a mess, and then the world's
Put that
a
all
mess.
together.
You put it all together.
It's
There's no, gosh, people, especially type A or people want, it's got to operate, and it's like, it just, so sometimes what you do is completely wrong, but oftentimes there's times where it's like, that was somewhat wrong. I could have been done that better. Maybe I meant well, or maybe I didn't. And so again, it's just all we can really do right now is say, how do I obey God in this?
Mm-hmm.
How do I? That doesn't mean there isn't consequences. There are, right? Sin is paid for by Christ on the cross. So you're not held in judgment to any sin, whether it's divorce or what, but consequences are going to be there.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And they're a reminder to just, okay, how do I faithfully obey today? What do I do today?
Right.
And in a way, you did that. In a little bit of a messy way. It wasn't like, oh, well, maybe you should have did this. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know.
Right.
But you did. You were faithful far more. And again, we're not in a competition here, right?
No,
but
absolutely.
Than probably most would be.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they would say, well, I made that decision. It's over. The heck with them.
And also, during that whole time that he was in the nursing home, there were a lot of opportunities to share.
Yeah.
That it's God. That is God that loves Gary so much that he's using me to be there for Gary.
Yeah.
And, you know, one CNA would always say to me when I got there, well, good afternoon, former wife. Because
is she like ethnically, like culturally different?
Well,
former wife is just a weird way to put it.
Well, I know, but because they in the nursing homes at that one anyway, the CNAs and the nurses and stuff, they would joke with some of the men and say, "Oh, yeah, that's my husband."
Okay.
So like Gary had a lot of wives, and then another one would come in and
he thought about going Mormon there.
Yeah, right. But she would say that, and she would tell, and she told me, she says, "Yeah, I said I was Gary's future wife," and so that's how I would reply back to her. She would say, "Good morning, former wife," and I'd say, "Good morning, future wife," and we would.
And also, let me warn you to not actually become that. Don't do it.
She was already married, so she wasn't planning on it.
Yeah. So you go through all that process. Gary finally dies. Gosh, he was on hospice for a long time.
God gave him so much extra time.
Yeah.
He really did.
It was pretty crazy. So not a lot of time to look back, but I mean a lot of that time knowing he was going to go. What do you think God has done in all of this?
I know with me, he's brought me closer to himself.
Yeah.
He has. Yeah. And showing me that he's God. And there was a time when I read, I am the Lord your God, and it penetrated. And so I went through and highlighted in my Bible all the times he said that. And I would pray that. And he's showing me that he is the Lord of my life. And that's why I wanted to be baptized again, because I wanted to rededicate my life to him. And I wanted people that knew me before, when I was a Christian trying to serve him the best that I knew how.
Sure.
During that time that I was so far away from God, I wanted them to know that God really is the Lord of my life.
Yeah.
And he shows me all the time in his word. And his word is living. It is so alive. And it shows each one of us individually what we need when we need it.
Yeah, it does.
He doesn't give it to us in advance. He gives it to us as we need it. He gave me the strength to go through. It's through all of those struggles, all of those difficulties, all of my pains, all of my sins, all of my regrets. He's taken me through. And I don't doubt that there'll be more.
Right.
I don't doubt that. But I think I now have a different attitude about it.
Yeah.
And I can say, what are you going to do in this, Lord? You know, what
Yeah.
what can I see? What can you show me through this?
Mm.
Or how can I help someone else?
What would you say to someone who looks back on their life, however old they might be, and really does feel guilt over, even as a Christian? Obviously, if they're not come to Christ, that's what we
Yes,
tell them. But
absolutely.
if they are, and they're in the church or whatever, and they look back and they're just still struggling with guilt, because that's something you've had to grapple with, right? Decisions
A
you've made.
lot of times.
Yeah. What do you
Yes.
say to them?
God has forgiven us
Mm.
through Jesus Christ, and Jesus paid that penalty, took the wrath
Mm.
that was due to me
Mm-hmm.
upon himself. And that wrath is also what was is going to be due to Satan.
Mm.
It's that kind of wrath. That
Mm.
was due to me because I was sinful too.
Yeah.
And Jesus took that, and in Hebrews it says, for the joy set before him.
Yeah.
I couldn't grasp that when I read it.
No.
But his love is so great and so powerful and so real that that's how much he loved us.
Do you feel like you have to remind yourself that a lot?
I do.
So it's not like you've arrived and you never struggle with
I
guilt.
don't think I don't I don't think I'll arrive until the day I see his face.
Yeah. Takes
There
great.
will be struggles, but
Mm.
his word is it's full of the promises. You know, I felt guilty when I found out that I was a child conceived in sin,
Mm-hmm.
but the Bible told me that God knew me then.
Right.
He knew me then, and he
Mm-hmm.
knows me now.
Mm.
And he's always known me, and he always knew that I would come to him.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I heard Jesus, I didn't choose Jesus, but Jesus chose me.
Mm.
That was like, wow.
Yeah.
But every time I read the word, he brings new truth to me about how much he loves me
Yeah.
and how much I am forgiven. I'm forgiven.
Mm.
I'm clean.
How do you think, and this is more of a guess or maybe based on recent experience, but how do you think God will use you because of these unique struggles to help other people in the next
Mm.
however many years the Lord has for you?
I'm not sure, but I think because of the past experiences that he's given me,
Mm.
um, maybe to be a facilitator of a small group,
Mm-hmm.
maybe to become more involved in working
Mm-hmm.
for him, doing something that's going to make a difference in other people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the things that I think this podcast has done is gives people, especially locally, um, we don't always get a chance to get to know people's stories, and just, sometimes it's just a consequence of like, when are you gonna, yeah, obviously you sit and talk about each other's life. You'll for those few people that'll happen, but we just see people as coming into church. Oh, you probably got yourself together, and it's like, no, none of us really
Yeah.
do, and
No.
and so it can be a learning experience for people to see, but it also can be, hey, I might be able to talk to her about this because I'm going through this with my husband or wife, or I'm going through um, a distance from God or whatever, feeling guilt, whatever they might have picked up on this,
Right.
and there you are, someone that they can approach and say, hey,
And I always
mm,
feel open
yeah,
when someone comes to me and asks what I've gone through, and um, I don't. I just want to be there.
yeah,
For
use it for His glory and help people.
absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely, because the word also tells us
mm,
that God is the God of all comfort.
Yeah.
He comforts us so that we can, in turn, comfort
Comfort others.
those with the same comfort that we receive from God.
Yeah. The word
So
comfort's in that verse a lot.
I mean, I became, so when after Chad had went through his 3 years, he didn't make the 3 years of completing his protocol. He relapsed and had to have a bone marrow transplant. He went through that and made it through. I went to work for the hospital in the oncology department in Rhode Island as a parent consultant. So I was able to share my experience as having a child with cancer. And I worked with a woman whose child died. Now, when they called me, the 2 workers, one of them was leaving, and she called me and said, I think you should apply. And I was like, there's no way I'm qualified for this.
Right.
But I had just prayed earlier that day that Lord, I need a job because now Chad's back to school, everything's back to normal, and, finances are not the greatest. I need to find a job. And then I get the phone call. So I applied for it, and I made it through the first interviews, then I made it through the second interviews with groups, and then the doctor that was in charge to make the final decision said, can you meet with me one more time? And I said, okay. And he was the director of the department, and I'm like, Lord, I don't know if this is what you want, where you want me. But if you do, you will give me the words I need to say. And he asked me, I only have one question. Why should I hire you? And I'm like, who? But I didn't stumble. I actually pointed my finger at him and I said, I should be hired because you don't have anybody that has bone marrow transplant knowledge. And children are surviving today and they're going to transplant. And that's why he hired me.
God gave you the...
He and I walked out of there and I'm like, you fool. You pointed your finger at the director of oncology?
Well, he asked for it.
And I was there for 3 years, 2.5 years. And that was the time that I needed to be there.
But I think the lesson, again, is God will use even the hardest of your experiences if you let him.
That's right.
If you're open to it. Just
That's
say,
right.
I don't want to just shut the door to that. I want to be available.
Right.
Because so many others are going through these different things. And the best people to help are those who've gone through it.
And it just brought to mind that years later, Chad was at work and one of his coworkers' son was diagnosed with leukemia. And so he asked me if I would go and talk with them. So I went and talked with his coworker and her husband, and I just did what I did. And later she told Chad, that was so much help. I'm so glad your mother did that.
Yeah.
And so I just thank the Lord that he does use what's in our life to be able to encourage others and bring them to him maybe.
Yeah.
Because I would share the Lord with a lot of the people that were there.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that's the whole idea of having you on, and I really appreciate it. It's not easy to tell some of that stuff.
It's not easy.
And
yeah.
But God will use it just like he's used you in so many ways and will continue to.
That's right.
And just continue.
And he'll use anybody who has the openness to let him.
Yeah. Well, thanks again. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right.
Okay.
And cut.
And cut.